Thinh and Mai used to have a peaceful married life. He was a security camera technician, gentle, quiet. Mai taught English at a language center near their home, quick-witted, introverted, rarely shared much. They had been married for 4 years. No children, no clear plans either. At first, everything seemed fine. They went to work in the morning, had dinner together at night, and went grocery shopping on weekends. But for almost half a year now, Thinh had been unemployed. His company laid off staff. He was dazed for a while, then stayed home doing odd repair jobs to get by. Meanwhile, Mai kept working steadily, even taught evening classes, often coming home very late. At first, Thinh didn't say anything, but over time, he became increasingly irritated. Mai often took her phone calls on the balcony. One time, he walked out and she immediately hung up. Thinh asked, "Why have you been coming home so late lately?" Mai was washing dishes and answered softly, "Extra classes. The center takes in a lot of urgent students at the end of the year." "I told you already. I've never seen you talk to any students. Are you trying to check up on me?" Mai stopped washing, turned around, her voice noticeably colder. The question wasn't loud, but it cut like a thin blade, slicing straight into the distance between them. Thinh said nothing, just sighed and turned away. That distance wasn't created on purpose by either of them, but day by day, it grew wider. That night, it started raining around 8 p.m. Thinh went out drinking with his old buddies. He didn't call Mai, didn't text her either. While they were drinking, Lam, his best friend, asked, "Your wife didn't say anything?" Thinh chuckled and raised his glass. "She's out teaching. Lately, we each have our own schedule. Feels like strangers living in the same house." Lam frowned, about to say something, but Thinh downed his glass before he could. Almost 1 a.m., Thinh came home. It was only drizzling, but cold. He stumbled with the key. The house was pitch dark. No TV sounds, no footsteps. He called softly, "Mai." No reply. He turned on the light. The house was tidy. Nothing unusual. Just a plate of plain white rice still wrapped in plastic wrap sitting on the table, as if someone had been waiting, but didn't have the patience to stay up late. Thinh stepped into the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. Soft yellow light spilling out from the night lamp. Mai lay on her side, back facing the door, wearing a white nightgown, her hair draped over one shoulder, covering half the pillow. He walked over and gently shook her shoulder. "Mai, I'm home." No reaction. He shook her harder. "Wake up, you're sleeping so deeply." But when his hand touched her skin, a chilling sensation shot down his spine. Her body was stiff, no warmth left. Thinh froze. He leaned in close to her face. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, the pupils glazed over, staring into nothingness. "Mai?" he screamed. His hands trembled. He collapsed to the floor, fumbling to dial emergency. By the time the ambulance arrived, neighbors had gathered at the door. The doctor needed only a few minutes to conclude she was dead. Her body was cold, no signs of life for at least 2 to 3 hours. Police came, sealed off the scene, took statements. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. Her phone was in the drawer, screen unlocked. The last message sent at 11:18 p.m. unanswered. An officer took notes, eyes fixed on Thinh's pale face. Now sitting on the floor. "You were the first to find your wife dead?" Thinh nodded, his voice shaky. I thought she was just asleep." "How long were you out tonight?" "I left at 8, drank with friends, got home around 1. Anyone enter your home while you were gone?" "No, it's just the two of us. I had the key." The officer paused his pen, glanced at his colleague who just walked out of the bedroom. "There's bruising on the back of her neck, likely hit with a blunt object. No sign of break-in." The other officer turned back and looked straight at Thinh. "You were the last person in that room with her. If it wasn't you, then who?" Outside, the rain had stopped. A white towel blew off the clothesline, fluttering and wrapping around an old metal bar. The porch light flickered on and off. Inside the bedroom, the yellow glow still shone on the untouched white blanket. The wedding photo on the vanity stood askew, its glass cracked diagonally, slicing across the woman's smiling face in the picture. The white towel was still hanging on the clothesline outside the porch. Now soaked and dripping, the porch light kept flickering, casting patchy shadows into the living room packed with people. Thinh sat at the edge of the couch, head down. A criminal investigator named Din stood in front of him, notebook in hand, voice firm. Your home security camera lost connection from 1:17 a.m. to 3:12 a.m. He paused, glancing at the monitor in the corner of the room, where a technician had just plugged in a device to extract footage. This camera system, you installed it yourself, didn't you? Thinh gave a slight nod, his voice hoarse. Yes, I set it up when we moved in, but I haven't touched it in over a year. Detective Din frowned and continued questioning. Is your internet a fixed connection or dynamic IP? Fixed, but there's a remote login account. I have an app on my phone. The younger officer standing nearby walked over, holding out his phone for Din to see. Here's the remote access log. A strange device logged into the system at 1:05 a.m. and erased all buffer data. Thinh looked up, eyes red. It wasn't me. I don't even clearly remember how I got home that night. Din closed the notebook, arms crossed. You're a technician. You have the knowledge, the tools, and the camera just happened to go dark the same time your wife died. He paused a moment, then spoke again, slower. I'm not jumping to conclusions just yet. But if it wasn't you, then someone wants to make it look like it was. That afternoon, Mai was taken to her mother's home to prepare for the funeral. The couple's small house was sealed off, but Thinh was allowed to return under supervision to collect a few personal items. He stepped into the bedroom, the lighting still the same, the night lamp casting a soft yellow glow. The curtains half drawn, Thinh looked toward the vanity, where their wedding photo sat with its glass cracked. He quietly bent down to pick up a small notebook that had fallen under the dresser. It was Mai's journal. He flipped through the first few pages, all household notes, work tasks from the center. But in the middle, a scribbled message stood out. If I die before you, there's definitely something I haven't said. He clenched his fist, stood motionless for a long time. The officer behind him spoke softly. Are you done? We need to lock up. Thinh nodded and stepped out. As the bedroom door closed, a gentle breeze blew in through the window, rustling the curtains slightly. But at that moment, no one looked back. That night, Thinh sat at his mother-in-law's house. Next to Mai's coffin, the faint scent of incense filled the air. Relatives sat scattered around the house, no one daring to speak loudly. The sound of chanting echoed faintly from the central room, breaking through the haze of smoke. Little Niam, who called Mai big sis, came running in but suddenly stopped at the living room entrance. She stared into the backyard and blurted out, Auntie, why is sis Mai standing out there? Everyone turned. Mai's older cousin quickly pulled the girl's hand, scolding gently, Don't say things like that. But Niam kept pointing outside, insisting, I saw her. She was wearing white. She was behind the flower pots. She didn't say anything, just kept looking into the house. The adults went quiet. A few glanced out into the backyard. Only the faint yellow light and the tall areca trees stood still. But as the cousin stepped out, the porch light flickered twice. At that same moment, over at Lam's house, Thinh's best friend, the landline phone rang. Lam was dozing at his work desk. Startled awake, eyes blurry, he picked up the receiver. Hello? No one answered. Only static, then a faint, broken whisper of a woman's voice came through, choking back tears, saying just one sentence. Please, don't let them forget me. Lam jumped up, glancing at the clock. Exactly 1:17 a.m. He froze, staring out the window. Outside, there was no wind. Yet the branches of the Loch Vung tree in the yard gently swayed, as if someone had just passed by. Morning at the forensic lab. The air was cold, the smell of chemicals clinging to every breath. White fluorescent lights cast shadows over a pair of bare feet covered by a white sheet. Thinh sat outside in the hallway, hands tightly clasped, back hunched, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He no longer recognized himself. A man, thin to the bone, wrinkled clothes, a hollow, lost look in his eyes. The door opened, Investigator Din stepped out, a file folder in hand. He looked at Thinh, no longer as stern as the day before. His voice softer. Preliminary autopsy report. Cause of death is blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. No scratch marks. No toxins. It wasn't suicide. Thinh looked up, his eyes red. Was she hit from behind? Din nodded slightly. The impact was fairly strong. Possibly from a blunt, non-sharp object, but no weapon was found at the scene. Thinh bit his lip, clenched his hands tighter. I didn't do it. I would never think of doing that to her. Later that afternoon, at Mai's mother's house, her cousin Nok was tidying up the temporary altar. Little Niam was sitting in a corner drawing, occasionally glancing toward the door. After a while, she scooted closer to Nok and whispered, "Auntie Nok, I just saw Big Sis Mai in the kitchen." Nok was lighting incense and paused mid-movement. She lowered the stick, turned back. "When did you see her?" "When you weren't looking. She was wearing white, long hair, standing behind the fridge door." Nok bit her lip, didn't answer. She walked over to the kitchen, opened the fridge door. Nothing there, but when she turned around, her eyes froze. A small mirror mounted on the wall reflected a faint handprint on the surface, right where the little girl had pointed. That night, Lam returned to his rented room after a long day. The small room had only one window facing the concrete courtyard of the apartment row. He tossed his phone onto the bed and walked into the bathroom to wash his face. Cold water gushed out. He lifted his head to look into the mirror. Behind him, in the mirror, was the shadow of someone standing by the window. Lam jolted, spun around. No one. His breathing quickened, heart pounding. Moments later, he walked out and drew the curtains. Outside was pitch black, no moon, no stars, but on the glass, there was a faint, damp smudge, shaped like a palm print, pressed from the outside. The next morning, Lam met Thinh at their usual coffee shop. Thinh silently stirred his iced coffee. Lam said nothing for a long while. Finally, he spoke. "Do you think someone deliberately killed Mai?" Thinh didn't look up, replied quietly, "I don't know anymore. There's too much I don't understand." Lam placed his hand on the table, lowered his voice. "Do you believe the dead can come back as spirits?" Thinh paused, looked up at his friend, frowning slightly. "What are you trying to say?" Lam pulled out his phone, opened a video. It was a clip from the surveillance footage on the night Mai died. He pointed at a small corner frame. I looked closely. At 2 a.m., there was a shadow that moved past Mai's window. "But you said you were the only one home at that time." Thinh froze. He stared at the screen, then shook his head. "That's impossible." Later that afternoon, while cleaning up, Mai's mother accidentally flipped through an old photo album in the cabinet. On the last page, tucked inside, was a Polaroid from high school. Mai, Thinh, and Lam, the three of them were smiling brightly. But what was strange, on the back of the photo, someone had scribbled in red ink. The handwriting shaky. "Only one gets to see me. The others are traitors." That same night, back at the apartment, Lam tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He flipped from side to side, then sat up and grabbed his phone. The screen lit up, but no new messages. Lights off. The room fell silent. Only the steady hum of the fan remained. Lam closed his eyes, pulled the blanket over himself. A few minutes later, a cold draft swept in. Even though the window was shut, the chill crept down his neck, making him shiver and open his eyes. Across the room, beside the wardrobe, stood a figure. She wore a white dress, long hair. She said nothing. She just stood there and stared straight at him. Early morning, Thinh sat in the small study room at his mother-in-law's house. On the table were a series of printouts from the surveillance footage sent by the police. He strained his eyes, examining each frame. In the right corner, exactly at 2:04 a.m., a shadowy figure passed through the hallway. No visible face, no clear shape, but one strange detail. The shadow didn't cast any reflection on the floor. His phone rang. It was Lam calling. Thinh picked up, his voice dry. "I'm reviewing the footage." Lam's voice on the other end was low too. I saw her again last night. Thinh stayed silent. I couldn't sleep. When I opened my eyes, she was standing right by the bedroom door, hair covering her face, but this time she didn't just stare. She came closer. Meanwhile, at the police station, investigator Thinh was reviewing data extracted from my personal computer. A separate folder labeled "Locked" contained an audio recording. A woman's voice, clearly mine, trembled. If something happens to me, then Thinh is the one who needs to hear this. I know someone's threatening me. I don't want to betray anyone, but I also don't want to keep hiding. Thinh looked up. His eyes narrowed. He hit stop and called the investigative unit. Trace all calls and messages to the victim's number in the last 2 months. Focus on late-night communications. That afternoon, Knock, my cousin, happened to find an old diary tucked inside a drawer of the vanity. She opened it, and among the handwritten pages was a passage. Lam said he would leave his wife to be with me. But I feel scared. Thinh doesn't deserve to be deceived. I once loved Lam, but that's in the past. I think everything should end here. Startled, Knock immediately called Thinh. Her voice trembled as she recounted everything. On the other end, Thinh said nothing. His hand gripped the phone so tightly the joints turned white. That night, Lam came home late from drinking. He staggered into his room, flipped on the light. Everything looked normal, but as he set his phone on the table, the light flickered rapidly, then went out. The entire room plunged into darkness. The fan stopped spinning. The air froze. The sound of slippers dragging slowly across the tile floor. Each step barely audible. Lam gasped, reaching for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam spread out, illuminating a figure slumped in the corner of the room. Facing the bed, Lam backed away, trembling. Who's there? The figure slowly raised its head. A ghostly pale face, eyes wide open, unblinking. It was Mai. She didn't move closer. She simply raised one hand, slowly, pointing directly at Lam. And for the first time since she died, she spoke. You are the traitor. Lam collapsed. Sweat poured down his forehead. He panicked, crawling backward, but his hand hit something hard under the bed. When he pulled it out, it was a white silk scarf, the one Mai used to wear. The problem was, Mai had never been to this rented room. And Thinh swore he'd never brought any of her things out of the house. The next morning, Thinh met with investigator Thinh. He laid a printed copy of the diary and the audio file on the desk. I'm no longer sure who the killer is. But one thing's certain. Someone entered that house, and it wasn't me. Thinh paused, then asked, Have you ever suspected Lam? Thinh looked down at the table, speaking slowly. I used to think a best friend would never betray me. But it turns out, the ones closest to you are the easiest to hide from. At the same time, Lam sat in his office, staring at an old high school photo. The three of them, him, Thinh, Mai, smiling brightly, but now, each stood on a different side, one dead, one in doubt, one living a lie. A breeze blew in through the window. Lam turned his head. The photo lifted and dropped to the floor. When he bent down to pick it up, the glass had cracked right across his face in the picture. He froze. For a brief moment, he saw someone standing behind him in the mirror. Very close. So close, he could feel the icy breath pass right across the back of his neck. The sky was overcast. In the interrogation room, a dim yellow light shone directly onto the table. Lam sat there, hands folded across his chest, no longer able to maintain the composure he once had. Dark circles under his eyes, messy hair, a wrinkled shirt that looked like it hadn't been changed in days. Investigator Thinh stood across from him, gently placing a stack of photos from the neighborhood surveillance cameras on the table. We found images of you near the victim's house at 12:57 a.m. Lam kept his head down, didn't react. The home camera system was accessed from your phone's IP. The last message on her phone came from an unknown number, but the voice in the recording was yours. Thinh's voice deepened. I'll ask one last time. Were you the one who returned to the house that night? Lam clenched his fists. 1 second, 2 seconds, then he looked up, his voice catching in his throat. I just wanted to see her one last time. I didn't mean to kill her. Dash. At that moment, Thinh stood in the old bedroom he once shared with his wife. The house had just been unsealed. He sat down beside the wardrobe, opening a hidden compartment behind the wooden panel, where Ma used to keep her private things. Inside was an old brown envelope. It held Mai's final voice recording, never sent. He played it, his hand trembling slightly. I'm tired. Between love, trust, and fear, I chose wrong. Lam said he needed me, but I know I was just a place to return to when he failed. And Thinh, I'm sorry, but you never truly looked at me. You only saw the silence, never the wounds I tried to hide. If I disappear, I hope someone remembers that my name wasn't her, or his wife, or someone he used to know. My name is Mai. I'm a person too. Thinh's ears burned hot. He stood up, stepped out to the balcony, and looked to the sky. A light drizzle fell, in the misty gray sky. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a figure in a white dress standing still on the rooftop across the street. The face wasn't clear, but he could feel it. She was looking at him, waiting to be called by her name. Dash. At the police station, Lam began confessing in detail. That night, he knew Mai was home alone. He knocked. She didn't open. He used the spare key. Inside, they argued. He begged her to come back. She refused, said she wanted to end everything. He lost control, didn't remember exactly what happened next. Only that, when he came to, she was already lying motionless. He erased the camera data, cleaned up, then left, framed Thinh for it all. Dash. After the confession was recorded, Lam was placed in temporary holding. That night, the guard reported, he cried all night, kept saying someone was standing at the foot of his bed, repeating one sentence over and over. My name is Mai. Why won't you call me by my name? No one else saw anything in the room. But the next morning, the guard discovered a faint message, traced in condensation on the cell window. Don't call me her. My name is Mai. Dash. Thinh visited his wife's grave. He stood silently for a long time. In his hands was their wedding photo, now placed in a new frame. He bowed his head and whispered, I'm sorry, Mai. A gentle breeze swept through, making the incense flare up once, then soften again. No strange sounds, no eerie signs, only soft sunlight filtering through the trees, casting shadows on the freshly cleaned gravestone. From across the cemetery, an old woman offering incense saw the scene and murmured, She's moved on now. When someone remembers your name to the very end, you don't have to wait anymore. The wind faded. The incense smoke disappeared into the cold gray dusk. The man stood still before the small grave, clutching the cracked wedding photo, where the smile of the woman in the picture had become nothing more than a memory. There were no more words left to say, only silence and the name he had just spoken, softly. But for the first time with full awareness and pain. Mai. The dead cannot return, but maybe, as long as someone remembers your name, holds onto it with that exact name, you haven't truly vanished from this world. If you've watched this far, perhaps you've felt some of that chill, not from a ghost, but from the forgetting of the living. Candle, thank you for staying until the end. If you enjoy stories that blend real emotion with ghostly chills, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next tale.